The year was 1971. 16-year-old Steve Jobs was attending Homestead High School in Los Altos, California. Jobs attended along with his friend Bill Fernandez. One day, Jobs and Fernandez were walking around the neighborhood when Fernandez saw one of his other friends washing his car. It was 21-year-old Steve Wozniak, and Bill thought this was a great opportunity to introduce Jobs to him. Jobs and Wozniak both shared a passion for electronics and pranks, so it was not surprising for Fernandez when they immediately got along well. Not very long after, Jobs started visiting Wozniak more often without Fernandez. Around the fall of 1971, Steve Wozniak built a blue box, a device that could make long-distance phone calls without paying a single dime. Wozniak was inspired to build his own blue box after reading an article from the Esquire magazine. Steve Jobs decided to sell Wozniak's blue boxes and split the profit with him. About 200 of Wozniak and Jobs' blue boxes were sold. This would be Jobs and Wozniak's first business partnership. In 1975, Jobs and Wozniak started attending the Homebrew Computer Club. This club was a huge source of inspiration for Wozniak, and after a short while, he started designing a computer around the Motorola 6800 CPU. The computer was able to connect to a much cheaper monitor, in contrast to most computers at the time. Furthermore, this beast had up to 8 whole kilobytes of memory. Even more impressive is the storage consisting of a whopping 256 bytes of read-only memory. In March of 1976, Wozniak completed and demonstrated a basic design of his computer at the Homebrew Computer Club. Steve Jobs immediately saw its commercial potential and suggested they would form a company and sell it. Wozniak was skeptical, but eventually agreed. Jobs was reminded of the time he worked at an apple orchard on a farm in Oregon. That's when he came up and proposed the name for the company, Apple, or Apple Computer, more specifically. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, along with Ronald Wayne, founded Apple Computer Company on April 1, 1976. Wayne joined the founding in return for a 10% stake in the company. Little did he know, this company would. He left the company after a week and sold his share back. To clarify, Wayne was highly afraid and uncertain after his own venture failed a few years earlier. Jobs and Wozniak attended the Homebrew Computer Club for the last time and presented the fully assembled Apple Computer 1, or Apple I. Shoprunner of the computer store Byte Shop, Paul Terrell, was impressed by this machine. Terrell gave Jobs and Wozniak his card and asked them to keep in touch. The following day, Jobs visited him at his store to sell the circuit boards for the computer. However, Terrell was only interested in buying a fully assembled machine and would order 50 of them and pay $500 each, which is equivalent to about $2,700 in 2024. Jobs ordered the components needed from Kramer Electronics and would pay them after he received the money from Terrell. Jobs and Wozniak spent a good chunk of their time building and testing the computers, along with their small crew, and managed to deliver them to Terrell on time. Despite having expected complete computers with a case, monitor, and keyboard, Terrell kept his word and paid them the money promised. Apple I went on sale in July 1976 for an interesting retail price. Although Wozniak said he just liked repeating digits and was not aware of its relation to the devil. Apple I included features like the ability to connect to an ordinary television and a cassette interface for loading and saving programs. Jobs started looking for investments, but was rejected by the banks because the idea of a computer for ordinary people seemed so absurd at the time. Jobs had previously worked for Nolan Bushnell at Atari, so he approached his former boss, which was Nolan Bushnell. Bushnell suggested meeting Don Valentine, but Valentine was not interested either. However, he introduced Jobs to millionaire Mike Markkula, who saw huge potential in Jobs and Wozniak. Markkula got them started with an investment of $92,000 of his own property and $250,000, which is equivalent to almost $1.4 million in 2024, secured from Bank of America. Markkula received a 1/3 stake in Apple, and Apple Computer Inc. was incorporated on January 3, 1977. In February, Markkula hired Michael Scott as the first CEO of Apple, as Jobs and Wozniak were seen as insufficiently experienced for the job at the time. The same year, graphic designer Rob Janoff was tasked to design the logo for Apple. Janoff drew a basic simplistic apple, but people may mistake it for a cherry or another similar looking fruit. So he added a bite into the apple. Lastly, to indicate that the Apple computers had color screens starting from their next computer, Apple II, he added different colored stripes, printed in its own specially mixed color. This was now the Apple logo, which was put to use in April 1977. On April 16, 1977, Jobs and Wozniak presented the all-new Apple II, the first personal computer with color graphics and the programming language BASIC built in, at the West Coast Computer Fair. Apple II went on sale in June 1977 for $1,298 and was Apple's first consumer product. It also now came in a keyboard case. The Apple II became one of the first highly successful mass-produced microcomputers. The use of cassette tapes as storage was suspended in 1978, and the Disk 2 floppy disk drive was introduced at a price of $495. The Apple II series, including later models Apple IIe and Apple II GS, went on to sell about 6 million units during its 16-year lifespan. In November 1980, the Apple III was released with a retail price ranging from $4,340 to $7,800. This was an immediate, massive failure. The Apple III was a commercial failure and suffered from tons of issues, including an overheating issue causing the microchips to disconnect from the motherboard. A large amount of Apple III computers were recalled. Despite the failure of Apple III, Apple went public on December 12, 1980, selling 4.6 million shares, generating over $100 million. Jobs and Wozniak instantly became millionaires, with Jobs' net worth growing to an estimated $250 million, which is roughly close to around $1 billion in 2024. On February 25, 1981, Michael Scott, who was hired as Apple's first CEO earlier, fired 40 employees, including half of the team behind Apple II. He then explained that he originally wanted to quit when being CEO at Apple wasn't fun anymore, but decided to just quote-unquote fire people until it's fun again. Jobs and Wozniak agreed with Mike Markkula to replace Scott and moved him to vice chairman with little power. This day is known as Black Wednesday, and Markkula took over as CEO of the company. In 1979, Jobs had visited the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center and learned about graphics user interfaces being worked on there. Jobs immediately redirected their newest upcoming project, the development of the Apple Lisa, to use a graphical user interface, or GUI. Another thing that caught Jobs' attention was that the GUI was mouse-driven. A mouse was not heard of at all at this time, so it was quite revolutionary. They adapted the mouse into the Lisa as well. The Apple Lisa was a huge project, and over $50 million was spent on its development. By 1982, the Lisa's basic layout was largely complete. Okay, so we've done everything you've wanted us to do. We followed your improvement suggestions, and we're close to finishing with the Apple Lisa. Reconstruct this part and do it all over again. Jobs was kicked out of the project because he kept continually suggesting improvements, so he joined another Apple project conceived by Jeff Raskin back in 1979, the Macintosh project. Jobs then redirected the project from working on a text-based computer to working on a cheaper and more usable version of the Apple Lisa, led by Jobs in secret and in parallel to compete with the Lisa team. The Apple Lisa launched on January 19, 1983. They had just failed with another computer, but now the Apple Lisa failed as well. And unsurprisingly so when it launched at a cost of $9,995. That is over $31,000 in 2024. But it wasn't over. In October 1983, Apple announced Macintosh to the press. By this time, John Sculley took over as Apple's CEO. A $1.5 million commercial directed by Ridley Scott announced the Macintosh's debut during Super Bowl XVIII's third quarter. The commercial is based on George Orwell's novel 1984 and ended with,
"On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Macintosh went on sale on January 24, 1984 for a retail price of $2,495, and it was received positively by the media as well as flying high in sales. Macintosh came with software like MacWrite and MacPaint, and was the first successful all-in-one personal computer with a GUI, built-in screen, and a mouse. In January 1985, Steve Wozniak was frustrated by the Apple II division and employees not being mentioned in the company's annual meeting, even though those products made up 85% of Apple's sales. This led him to leave Apple in spring 1985. CEO John Sculley removed Steve Jobs as the general manager of the Macintosh division in April 1985 with support from the board of directors, and Jobs then attempted to oust him from his role at the company. However, Scully found out about this and took away all of Jobs' management responsibilities, leading Jobs to resign from Apple as well. Afterwards, Jobs founded Next Inc., taking some of the Apple employees with him. Jobs also acquired the visual effects and animation studio Pixar for $5 million. The Macintosh would become the standard for arts industries like cinema, music, publishing, and advertising. The Apple II computers continued to remain the primary source of income from Apple, however. Multiple products were released in the Mac lineup, and included the Mac Plus in 1986, the Mac SE and Mac II in 1987, and the Mac Classic and Mac LC in 1990. Apple launched its first portable computer, the Macintosh Portable, in 1989. Although the Macintosh Portable failed, Apple launched the PowerBook in 1991, which became a huge success. In 1993, Michael Spindler took over as Apple's CEO, and the Apple Newton, a personal digital assistant, was released, but it was a failure. Apple collaborated with IBM on Project Pink, the development of a new operating system named Taligent, to replace macOS System 7. Apple left the project and IBM would finish it. In 1994, Apple began working on Project Copland, another development on a new version of macOS. Copland suffered from development hell because software initially planned for Taligent had to be reworked, so the project was scrapped in 1996. The same year, Jill Amelio took over as Apple's CEO. In December 1996, Steve Jobs' company, Next and the Next Step operating system, was bought by Apple, bringing Jobs back to Apple's management. Jill Amelio was ousted from his role as Apple's CEO in July 1997, and Jobs took the role as interim CEO in August 1997. Jobs had a role to restructure the product line and return Apple to profitability. Under Jobs' leadership, Apple began working on the iMac. This computer would feature a CRT display and a G3 processor into a streamlined and translucent plastic body. The iMac was unveiled by Steve Jobs on May 6, 1998, and started being shipped in August 1998. Apple's first consumer-oriented laptop, the iBook, was introduced in 1999 along with various different color choices for the iMac's body. Jobs had only been a temporary CEO due to the abrupt ousting of Jill Amelio, but from January 2000, it was confirmed that Jobs would be the official CEO of Apple. In March 2001, Apple released macOS 10, which was based on Next Step, developed by Next. macOS 10 started a new line of macOS versions, succeeding the previous classic macOS era. In October 2001, Apple announced the iPod, the first of Apple's line of portable digital audio players. The iPod went on to be an enormous commercial success throughout the 2000s. In April 2003, Apple launched the iTunes Store. 2 million songs were downloaded the first 16 days, and the store's availability eventually spread throughout more countries. The iMac G4 was unveiled in 2002, which was a completely redesigned iMac with a flat panel LCD display. The iMac G5 was released in 2004, with a flat panel screen suspended from a streamlined aluminum foot instead of a hemispherical base. The iMac would remain in a flat screen aluminum footed design throughout the following generations. In 2006, Apple transitioned to Intel for the Mac computers. The Intel iMac and the MacBook Pro were introduced in January of 2006, and Apple completed the transition to Intel on all of their hardware by the end of that year. The MacBook, which was first introduced the same year, was a successor to the iBook laptops. 1 month later, on January 9, 2007, Apple Computer Incorporated shortened its name to just Apple Incorporated. Steve Jobs had his 2007 keynote address at the Macworld Expo the same day. It was in this presentation he revealed a revolutionary product in an industry Apple had not competed in before.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
The Apple iPhone featured a touchscreen with multi-touch on a widescreen display because
who wants a stylus? You have to get them and put them away and you lose them. Yuck. Nobody wants a stylus.
The iPhone ran on iPhone OS, later renamed to iOS, which had its design based on the then current Mac OS X. It featured visual voicemail and a fully functional version of Apple's Safari web browser as well, along with many other features. The iPhone became publicly available on June 29, 2007. Around a year later, in 2008, Apple launched the iPhone 3G, the second generation iPhone, which came with the all-new App Store, which allowed distribution of third-party applications. On January 27, 2010, Apple announced the iPad, the first generation of Apple's line of tablet computers, similar to but with a larger screen than the iPhone, minus the cellular features. The iPad became available for retail in April. Despite initial fears of product cannibalization because of the iPad, quite the opposite happened, where iPad sales led to increased sales of Mac computers. The new iPhone 4 became available for pre-order on June 15, 2010, and it had the largest number of pre-orders Apple had received in a single day until then, with 600,000 pre-orders for the iPhone 4 within one day. The iPhone 4 had sold 1.7 million units within the first 3 days of its release on June 24, 2010, outperforming previous models by a huge amount. Back in October of 2003, Steve Jobs was diagnosed with cancer and announced to his employees in 2004 that he had pancreatic cancer. On August 24, 2011, Jobs resigned as CEO of Apple, handing his title to current CEO Tim Cook. And 6 weeks later, around 3 p.m. on Wednesday, October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. Apple's first product under Cook's leadership, the iPhone 4S, was released on October 14th, 2011. The iPhone 4S introduced the Siri virtual assistant, and 4 million units were sold in the first 3 days of the iPhone 4S's release. That was more than double the number of sales of the previous iPhone 4. iOS 6 launched in September 2012 with a new Maps app. The launch of the Maps app was a disaster and was full of issues and errors. Viral images of errors and bugs like weird deformations in the new 3D satellite view, among other goofy issues, turned Apple Maps into a huge joke. Tim Cook published an apology for the app's inconveniences and lack of quality, and even said this: "While we're improving Maps, you can try alternatives by downloading map apps from the App Store, like Bing, MapQuest, and Waze. Or use Google or Nokia Maps by going to their websites and creating an icon on your home screen to their web app." Wait, what? Yeah. Cook redirected everyone to map apps made by competitors. And the leader of Apple's software development team, Scott Forstall, did not like that. Forstall had also led the development of Apple Maps and believed the complaints were overblown. Forstall refused to sign the apology letter. Many of the people inside Apple now had enough of Forstall, and Tim Cook decided to fire Forstall out of Apple, and he would depart in 2013. Forstall, who had been the leader of the software development team since the original iPhone, for iPhone specifically, favored skeuomorphism, like Steve Jobs did. Skeuomorphism is the realistic aesthetic based on physical objects, and had been the entire iOS's design style ever since its original launch. However, Jonathan Ive took over software design in 2013 after Forstall's departure, and he favored minimalism and simplicity. On June 10, 2013, at the Worldwide Developers Conference, Apple unveiled iOS 7. This version of iOS completely redesigned the entire user interface into an extremely minimalistic and simplistic one. New features like the control center and AirDrop were introduced as well. On September 18, 2013, iOS 7 was released and was installed on 200 million devices within 5 days, leading Apple to state this as the fastest software upgrade in history. The Apple Watch was released on April 24, 2015, and was the first new product range since Jobs' passing. Despite the Apple Watch receiving mixed reviews, it generally sold well. In 2020, Apple's Mac computers would transition from Intel processors to Apple Silicon. In November 2020, Apple introduced the new Mac Mini, MacBook Air, and 13-inch MacBook Pro, all featuring the new Apple M1 chip. Apple introduced the more powerful and professional-focused M1 Pro and M1 Max in October 2021. Both chips were introduced along with a redesigned 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, with the chips in them. The 2021 MacBook Pro was praised and fixed many issues with previous MacBooks. It's also the computer that I use. In 2022, the European Union enforced a rule to force all phones to have a USB-C port for charging by the end of 2024. This led to the iPhone 15, released in 2023, being the first iPhone to use a USB-C port, after having consistently used a Lightning port for over 10 years. As of this video's making, the latest Apple products include the M3 Pro and M3 Max MacBook Pros and the iPhone 15 models. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by leaving a like, comment, or perhaps even subscribing to my channel. I hope you don't mind the sudden slight topic change if you are a returning viewer, as I may have accidentally picked something more on the electronic/brand history topic rather than the usual entertainment history, meaning film and video games. If you clicked on this video and happen to also be interested in that, please take a look at The Simpsons, a 37-year history. I will try to target my videos more consistently again towards entertainment history. Anyways, thanks for watching this video.